A gunshot cracked through the Montana wilderness like breaking bone. Marcus Hartwell's eyes snapped open. He was in his narrow bunk, sweat cold on his skin, the warm September morning of 1867, doing nothing to chase away the chill. The sound had come from his dream again. The same nightmare, 3 times a week, regular as a church bell. A wife's final breath. A town's cruel judgment. But this morning felt different. His mare, Duchess, was kicking up a storm in the corral, stamping and snorting like she'd caught the scent of a wolf on the wind. Marcus rolled from his bed, his worn leather boots hitting the creaking floorboards. Through the small, grimy window, he saw his breath mist in the crisp air. Beyond it, the golden hills of his ranch rolled on forever, a lonely kingdom stretching all the way toward Helena. He'd built this place with his own 2 hands. Fled here 3 years ago after the town was done with him. Every fence post driven deep. Every board cut square. Every nail hammered straight. The work was the only thing that had kept the grief from swallowing him whole. Now, 15 miles from the nearest soul, Marcus had found a bitter kind of peace. The peace that comes with being forgotten. The cabin door groaned on its leather hinges as he stepped outside. Duchess whinnied again, her dark, intelligent eyes fixed on something just beyond the pine trees. Marcus trusted that horse. He'd learned to trust her instincts during his years as a cavalry scout. Animals sense trouble long before men do. "What's got you spooked, girl?" he murmured, approaching her pen with slow, easy steps. The morning air carried a strange sound. Not the usual babble of the creek or the whisper of wind through the branches. This was something else. Something that made his stomach clench into a tight, cold knot. A cry, maybe. A thin, desperate call for help. It was too faint to be sure. But Duchess kept pointing her ears toward Willow Creek, where the water curved around a thick stand of cottonwoods. That was all the confirmation he needed. Marcus saddled his mare with the quick, practiced movements of a man who'd done it 1,000 times. His rifle slid into its leather boot on the saddle. His Colt stayed right where it belonged, snug at his hip. Living alone in wild country meant being ready for anything. Bears, mountain cats, or the 2-legged kind of trouble that sometimes wandered up from the valleys below. The ride through his pasture took him past 20 head of good stock, bought with the last of his army pay. They grazed peacefully, their tails swishing at flies. Everything looked normal. But the feeling in his chest, that cold, tight knot, said otherwise. As they entered the trees, Duchess picked her way carefully down the rocky slope toward the creek. The sound of rushing water grew louder, and with it, something else. A voice, thin and desperate, calling out words he couldn't quite make out. Marcus dismounted near a lightning-split pine, tying Duchess to a low branch. He moved on foot now, silent as a ghost, working his way through the brush until he could see the creek clearly. And what he found there made him freeze, like a man struck by a sudden winter wind. A girl was tied to a cottonwood tree. Her wrists were bound with rough rope, her dress torn and caked with dirt. She couldn't have been more than 17, with dark hair hanging in tangled knots around her shoulders. She was bruised and beaten. But it wasn't her condition that made Marcus's blood run cold. It was the words. The words burned into the bark of the tree just above her head. Comanche Lover. The letters had been carved deep, seared into the wood with a hot iron. A branding tool, probably. Whoever did this wanted to make sure their message lasted. In the frontier territories, those 2 words meant only one thing. A death sentence. This girl had been marked. Condemned as someone who'd chosen Indians over her own people. Marcus had seen punishments like this before, back in his army days. Settlers who traded with the tribes, women who'd been captured and then rescued, only to be seen as tainted. Anyone who showed a shred of kindness to the native peoples faced the same cruel judgment. The girl would be shunned, driven away, or worse. She looked up as his shadow fell across her. Marcus expected to see fear in her eyes, terror, desperation. He saw none of it. Instead, she watched him with the steady, unnerving gaze of someone who had already faced the worst this world had to offer, and had somehow survived it. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from thirst, but when she spoke, her voice didn't tremble. "Please," she said, "don't leave me here to die." Marcus studied her face, searching for any sign of sickness, of madness. He found neither. What he saw was a young woman who'd been judged by people who didn't know her story, condemned by folks who'd never walked a single step in her shoes. He knew that feeling all too well. 3 years ago, the good citizens of Helena had run him out of town for the crime of marrying a crow woman named Swift Arrow. They'd called her a savage. They'd called him a traitor to his own kind. And when she died giving birth to their son, a baby that lived only for a few precious minutes, those same people had whispered that it was God's punishment, God's righteous judgment for mixing the races. Looking at this girl now, this stranger tied to a tree, Marcus felt the old anger rising in his chest, hot as a branding iron. But with it came something else, something he hadn't felt since Swift Arrow's last breath. The need to protect someone who couldn't protect herself. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice rough as he pulled the knife from his belt. "Isabella," she whispered. "Isabella Cruz." Marcus knelt beside the tree and began to saw at the ropes. "Well, Isabella Cruz," he said, the sharp blade slicing through the fibers. "Today is your lucky day." The ropes fell away like shed snakeskin. Angry red marks circled Isabella's wrists. She rubbed the feeling back into her hands while Marcus offered her his canteen. She drank deeply, greedily, water spilling down her chin, but she didn't seem to care. "How long have you been here?" Marcus asked, studying the burn marks on the tree. The wood was still dark. This had happened recently. 2 days, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Maybe 3. Hard to tell when you're drifting in and out." Marcus helped her to her feet. He noticed how she favored her left ankle. Someone had hurt her badly before tying her up. The thought made his jaw clench, but he kept his voice gentle. "Can you ride?" She nodded, though he could see the effort it cost her. "I can do whatever I need to do." As they walked toward Duchess, Isabella started to tell her story. It came out in bits and pieces, fractured and raw. She'd been with a wagon train from Santa Fe, heading north to meet relatives in Virginia City. "Apache raiders," she said, accepting his help to mount the horse. "They hit us at dawn, scattered everyone." Marcus swung up behind her, feeling the tremors that ran through her small frame despite her brave words. He wrapped one arm around her waist to steady her. "I got separated from the others," she continued, leaning back against his chest as Duchess started the slow climb toward the cabin. "Wandered for 2 days before I collapsed, near a Comanche camp." Marcus kept silent, letting her talk. He knew this part was important. "What happened there?" "A warrior found me. His name was Grey Wolf. I was half dead from thirst and heat." She paused, and Marcus could feel her take a shaky breath. "He could have killed me, taken my scalp as a trophy. Instead, he gave me water. He tended my wounds." The story came out slowly, painfully, as they rode. Grey Wolf had taken her to his lodge. For 4 days, he and his wife had cared for her. They fed her, dressed her injuries, treated her not as an enemy, but as a guest. When she was finally strong enough to travel, he'd given her a small, beaded medicine pouch for luck and pointed her toward the main stage road. "A cavalry patrol found me there," Isabella said, her voice flat. "When they saw the Comanche beadwork, the pouch he gave me, they decided I was tainted. They said no decent woman would accept gifts from savages." Marcus felt the anger building in him again, a familiar, bitter taste in his mouth. He'd heard that kind of talk too many times. The simple, ugly way some folks painted all Indians as monsters. It made it easier for them to justify taking land that wasn't theirs, to justify any cruelty. "The wagon master wouldn't take me back," she said, her voice barely a whisper now. "Said I'd bring bad luck to the train. So the soldiers, they brought me here." She touched the raw marks on her wrists. "They wanted to make sure everyone would know what I was." They had reached the cabin. Marcus helped Isabella down from the horse. She stood unsteadily, one hand on Duchess's neck for support. In the full light of day, he could see the extent of the damage. The bruises mottling her face, the cuts on her arms, the dark, angry mark of a rope burn around her throat. "Why didn't they just shoot you?" The question came out harder than he'd intended. Isabella's dark eyes met his, and there was no self-pity in them, only a terrible, weary clarity. "Because that would have been merciful," she said. "They wanted me to suffer first, to serve as a warning." Marcus led her into the cabin, settling her in the simple wooden chair beside his small table. The room was sparse, a stone fireplace, a few shelves for his books, pegs for his clothes. Nothing fancy, but it was clean and it was warm. "I've got some jerky and hardtack," he said, rummaging through his supplies. "And there's a room in the back where you can rest." Isabella accepted the food gratefully. She ate in small, careful bites, like someone whose stomach had forgotten how to handle a real meal. Between bites, she studied him with those curious, steady eyes. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "Most folks would have left me tied to that tree." Marcus poured coffee into 2 tin cups, the action buying him a moment to think. He could have given her the easy answers. Christian duty. Simple human decency. But looking at this young woman, seeing the shadow of the world's judgment in her eyes, a shadow he knew so well, he decided to give her the truth. "Because I know what it's like to be marked," he said finally. "To have people decide who you are based on nothing but their own fears." And then he told her. He told her about Swift Arrow. About their brief, happy marriage and the town's ugly reaction. About watching his wife die because the doctor took his sweet time coming, claiming he had more important patients to see. About the whispers and the cold shoulders that followed him everywhere he went, until he finally gave up and left civilization behind. When he finished, Isabella was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. "So this ranch," she said, her voice soft. "It's not just your home. It's your hiding place." The words stung, because they were true. Marcus had built his life around being invisible, around avoiding the kind of judgment that had nearly destroyed him. But looking at Isabella now, at her fierce, quiet courage, he wondered if hiding was really the same thing as living. "Maybe it has been," he admitted. "But maybe that's about to change." Just then, Duchess let out a nervous whinny from the corral. Both Marcus and Isabella turned toward the window. In the distance, a dust cloud was rising from the direction of Helena. A big one. Riders were coming. A lot of them. And Marcus had a sick, sinking feeling in his gut that he knew exactly what they wanted. Isabella saw it too. Her face went pale, but she didn't crumble. She straightened in her chair, her hand instinctively going to the small Comanche medicine pouch at her waist. The gift that had condemned her. "They've come for me," she said simply. Marcus moved to the wall, taking down his rifle. He checked the action, made sure his Colt was loaded and loose in its holster. He had spent 3 long years running from a confrontation. But some fights you can't run from. Some battles come to you, whether you're ready or not. "Let them come," he said. Isabella's eyes snapped open. A trapped animal hearing footsteps in the brush. This man, this stranger with sad eyes, was cutting the ropes that had rubbed her wrists raw. But she couldn't let herself trust him. Not yet. Too many people had smiled right before they hurt her. "Easy now," Marcus said softly, his voice like he was calming a spooked horse. "I'm not going to harm you." She tried to stand, but her legs were jelly. 3 days tied to that tree had leached all the strength from them. She buckled, and he caught her before she hit the ground. His arms were steady, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. Up close, she could see the grief living deep in the lines around his eyes. This was a man who knew about loss. "Can you ride?" he asked, glancing up at the sky. Dark clouds were massing over the mountains. A storm was coming. Rain would wash away their tracks, but the cold could kill a person in her condition. "I can try," she whispered, her throat as dry as old leather. As Marcus helped her onto his big mare, Isabella studied his face. Most white men she'd met looked at her like she was something they'd scraped off the bottom of their boot. This one looked at her like she was a person, and that scared her almost more than the hate did. People who cared could be hurt, and she'd already caused enough pain to last a lifetime. The horse moved carefully down the rocky slope. Isabella gripped the saddle horn, fighting off waves of dizziness. She had to tell him the whole truth before they reached wherever he was taking her. He deserved to know exactly what kind of trouble he was bringing home. "Mister," she started, then realized she didn't even know his name. Marcus Hartwell. He didn't look back, his eyes scanning the trail ahead. "Mr. Hartwell, there's something you need to know." The words felt heavy as stones in her mouth. "What they burned into that tree, it's not exactly a lie." That made him turn. He twisted in the saddle, and his blue eyes searched her face. She waited for the disgust to appear. The judgment. But it wasn't there. Not yet. "My family was traveling from Santa Fe," Isabella began, her voice gaining strength as the story spilled out. "When the Apache attacked, I got separated. I fell down a steep hill, hit my head. When I woke up, there was blood everywhere, and I couldn't remember which way the wagons had gone." The horses' hooves clicked against stone as they crossed a small stream. The sound reminded her of the clicking beads on the pouch that had started all this trouble. "I wandered for 2 days before I collapsed," she said. She touched the small leather pouch still tied to her belt. "That's when he found me. His name was Running Bear. He was Comanche. Young, maybe 20 summers. His band was camped nearby, following the buffalo." Marcus pulled his horse to a stop. They'd reached a clearing, and below them, she could see his ranch spread out in the valley. A neat cabin with smoke curling from the chimney. A sturdy barn, cattle grazing in the pasture. It looked peaceful, the kind of place where a family might live, where children might play. It looked like a dream she'd forgotten how to have. "He could have taken me prisoner," Isabella said, her voice quiet. "Could have traded me to another tribe, or worse. Instead, he brought me to his grandmother, an old woman who knew the healing herbs. They fed me, gave me clean clothes. They tended my wounds." She pulled the leather pouch from her belt and showed it to Marcus. The intricate beadwork, blue and white, swirled across the soft buckskin like water frozen in motion. "Running Bear's grandmother made this for me. She said the pattern would bring me safe travels." She paused, remembering the old woman's kind, wrinkled face. "When I was strong enough to walk, Running Bear guided me back to the main trail. He waited with me for 3 days, hidden in the rocks, until a cavalry patrol came by." Marcus took the pouch from her, turning it over in his big, weathered hands. His touch was respectful, as if he understood it was something more than just beads and leather. "The soldiers saw this," Isabella said, her cheeks burning with the memory of the shame. "And they decided I was corrupted. They said no decent woman would accept gifts from savages. The patrol leader, a Captain Garrison, he got real angry when I tried to explain. He said I was probably planning to lead a Comanche war party to attack other wagon trains." The wind picked up, making the aspen leaves tremble and shimmer like silver coins. Isabella shivered, remembering the cold, dead look in Captain Garrison's eyes. "They took me back to my wagon train, but the wagon master wouldn't let me rejoin them. He said I'd bring bad luck, Indian trouble." Her voice broke just a little. "My own uncle. My uncle Fernando. He agreed with him. He said the family name couldn't survive the shame." Marcus handed the pouch back to her. She was surprised to see a flicker of hot anger in his eyes, but it wasn't directed at her. "So they left you," he said quietly. "3 of them volunteered to deal with the problem. They rode me out to that tree. They carved those words to warn other women what happens when you forget your place. They said the Indians or the wolves would finish what they started." She looked down at Marcus, bracing herself for the disgust she was sure she'd see now. The contempt. Instead, his jaw was set like granite, tight with a fury he was struggling to control. "Mr. Hartwell," she whispered, "if you change your mind about helping me, I'll understand. I know what people will say if they find you with me, what they'll do to you for helping someone like me." Marcus didn't answer right away. He just clicked his tongue, guiding the horse down the last gentle slope toward the ranch house. The building looked solid, welcoming, with a wide front porch, and windows that seemed to glow with a warm light. Isabella tried not to let herself hope. Hope was a dangerous thing when you'd already lost everything. Isabella, Marcus said, and the sound of her own name, spoken with kindness, was a shock. I learned something a long time ago. The people who talk the loudest about morality are usually the ones with the least of it. As they approached the house, Isabella noticed how carefully everything was arranged. The woodpile was stacked just so. The fence posts were straight as arrows. The garden rows were perfectly aligned. This was a man who took pride in his work, a man who built things to last. Besides, Marcus added, dismounting and then reaching up to help her down, from the sounds of it, Running Bear and his grandmother showed you more Christian charity than any of those folks on that wagon train. As far as I'm concerned, that makes them better people than the ones who left you to die. Isabella's feet touched solid ground, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. She felt a flicker of something that might have been safety. But as Marcus led her toward the house, toward the warmth and the promise of shelter, she couldn't shake the cold, certain feeling that their troubles were just beginning. The warm kitchen wrapped around Isabella like a mother's hug. She'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be truly warm. To sit at a real table with a clean plate and the smell of fresh bread in the air. Marcus moved around the small space with a quiet, easy efficiency, ladling thick venison stew into 2 bowls, slicing off chunks of cornbread. "When did you last eat?" he asked, setting a steaming bowl in front of her. Isabella had to think. Time had become a strange, blurry thing during her ordeal. "The soldiers, they gave me some hardtack 2 days ago. I think. Maybe it was 3. She forced herself to eat slowly, even though her stomach was cramping with a fierce, hollow hunger. Marcus sat across from her, but she noticed he barely touched his own food. He just watched her, with the careful, quiet attention of a man trying to solve a puzzle. "You mentioned your family," he said gently. "Are they still traveling west?" The spoon trembled in Isabella's hand. She'd been trying so hard not to think about them. Her parents. Her little brother Miguel. Her cousin, Rosa. "I don't know. The wagon master was heading for California. Papa wanted to buy land there, start a farm." Her voice got smaller, thin as a thread. "They probably think I'm dead." Marcus reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His skin was rough and calloused from years of ranch work, but his touch was gentle. "We'll find a way to get word to them. We'll let them know you're alive." Isabella pulled her hand away. Not because his touch was unwelcome, but because she felt like she didn't deserve that kind of kindness. "Mr. Hartwell, you don't understand. Even if we could reach them, they might not want me back. Not after—" Her throat closed up. She couldn't say the words, not after her own uncle agreed to leave her behind. "Then your uncle is a fool," Marcus said, his voice carrying a quiet, unshakable conviction. "And if your parents let fear rule their hearts, then that's their loss, not yours." Isabella looked around the simple kitchen, taking in the small details that told the story of a solitary life. 1 plate, 1 cup, 1 set of silverware drying in the rack, a single well-worn chair pulled up close to the fireplace. Everything was neat, orderly, but empty of the warm, messy chaos that comes with a family. "You live alone," she observed. It wasn't a question. Marcus's expression shifted, became guarded. "Most of the time. But you built this place for more than one person," Isabella pressed gently. She gestured toward the door to the extra bedroom she'd glimpsed, toward the large table that could easily seat 6. This was meant to be a family home. For a long moment, the only sounds in the cabin were the crackle of the fire and the wind beginning to rattle the window panes. Outside, the promised storm was rolling in, bringing with it the sharp, clean scent of snow. "I was married once," Marcus said finally, his voice low. "Her name was Swift Arrow. She was Crow, daughter of a respected elder. I met her when I was an aide to the territorial governor, negotiating treaties." Isabella set down her spoon, sensing this was a story Marcus didn't tell often, if ever. "The officials in Helena, they weren't pleased when I married her. Said it sent the wrong message, a government man taking an Indian wife." Marcus stared into his untouched stew as if seeing the past there. But Swift Arrow. She was the smartest, bravest woman I'd ever met. She could track a deer through solid rock, heal a sick calf with wild herbs she'd gathered. She could speak 4 languages. What happened to her? Isabella asked softly. She got pregnant 2 years after we married. We were so happy. We were planning for the baby, talking about names. His voice grew thick with old, raw pain. But the birth went wrong. The doctor from town. He refused to come out this far to help an Indian woman. And the midwife from Swift Arrow's village was 3 days' ride away. Isabella felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She'd seen enough death on the trail to know how quickly joy could curdle into the deepest sorrow. I lost them both that winter, Marcus said, his voice hollow. My wife and my son. He pushed his bowl away, the food long since gone cold and forgotten. After the funeral, the good people of Helena made it clear I wasn't welcome anymore. Said I'd brought shame on the territory by mixing the races. So I came out here. I built this place. And I tried to forget. But you didn't forget, Isabella said, her voice a soft whisper. No, Marcus said, looking directly at her then. And in his eyes, Isabella saw her own pain reflected back at her. I didn't forget. That's why I understand what those people did to you, Isabella. They are so afraid of anything that's different, anything they don't understand, that they'd rather destroy it than try to learn from it. The storm hit the cabin then, a physical blow, rattling the shutters and sending a puff of smoke back down the chimney. Marcus rose to bank the fire, his movements slow and deliberate. Isabella watched him, thinking about the profound loneliness that must fill this house on most days. Mr. Hartwell, she said, I don't want to bring my trouble to your door. If my staying here puts you in danger, call me Marcus. He settled back into his chair, studying her face. And you're not bringing trouble. The trouble was already here. It's always been here. Hiding in people's hearts like a poison. Sometimes it just takes something like this to make it show its face. Isabella pulled the Comanche beadwork from her pocket, running her thumb over the intricate patterns. Running Bear's grandmother said these designs tell stories. This one here, she pointed to a series of interconnected circles, represents the connection between all living things. She said that hate comes from forgetting that connection. Smart woman, Marcus said with a nod. She also said something else. Isabella hesitated, not sure if she should share the old woman's strange words. She looked at my palm, and she said I would face a choice between safety and truth. She said that choosing safety would save my life, but choosing truth would save my soul. Thunder crashed directly overhead, a deafening boom that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. Marcus glanced toward the windows, where icy rain was now streaking down the glass. What do you think she meant? He asked. Isabella folded the beadwork carefully, tucking it back into her pocket, as if it were a sacred thing. I think she knew this would happen. The soldiers, the wagon train, being left behind. I think she was warning me that I'd have chances to lie, to hide who I am, to deny what really happened with her grandson, to take the safe path. Isabella met Marcus's steady gaze across the table. And instead, I told the truth, even when it meant losing everything. And I'm still telling the truth now, Marcus, even though I know it might cost you everything too. The wind howled around the cabin like a hungry wolf. But inside the little kitchen, warmed by the fire and an unexpected thread of honest conversation, Isabella felt something she had almost forgotten could exist. Not just safety, something more. Belonging. The dangerous, fragile beginning of a home. Marcus, she said, testing the name on her tongue. Thank you. He just nodded, standing to clear the dishes. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. But as Isabella made her way to the small, clean bedroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that what comes next had already been set in motion. Somewhere out there in the storm, forces were gathering. Forces that would test both of them in ways they couldn't possibly yet imagine. The last thing she heard before sleep finally claimed her was the solid, reassuring sound of Marcus checking the locks on all the doors. The thunder of hoofbeats shattered the morning calm like a rock thrown through glass. Marcus dropped his coffee cup, the hot liquid splashing across the floor, and grabbed his rifle from the wall mounts in one fluid motion. 6 riders were charging toward his cabin, dust clouds billowing behind them like the smoke of an advancing army. Isabella burst through the kitchen door, her face as pale as the fresh snow that had fallen overnight. "They found me," she whispered, her knuckles white as she clutched the doorframe. Captain Wade Garrison sat tall and arrogant on his black stallion, the brass buttons on his uniform gleaming in the cold morning sun. Behind him rode 5 soldiers, their hands resting on their holsters, their expressions grim. They looked like a pack of wolves that had finally cornered their prey. Marcus had heard stories about Garrison, a man who'd made his name hunting runaway slaves before the war, a man who burned Indian villages to the ground and had the gall to call it justice. "Morning, Hartwell!" Garrison called out, his voice smooth as snake oil, but with a venomous bite. "Beautiful day to clean up some trash, don't you think?" Marcus stepped out onto his porch, keeping his rifle held low, but ready. "State your business, Captain, then get off my land." Garrison let out a laugh that sounded like dry branches breaking. "Oh, I think you know why we're here. That little Comanche-loving whore you're hiding behind your skirts needs to come with us. She's got some explaining to do." Isabella appeared at Marcus's side, her chin held high, defiance burning in her dark eyes. "I already told you what happened. They saved my life when your kind of people left me to die." "Saved you?" Garrison spat a brown stream of tobacco juice into the clean white snow. "More like corrupted you. No decent white woman lets a savage touch her and lives to tell the tale." The words hit Isabella like a physical slap, but she didn't flinch. She stood her ground. And in that moment, Marcus felt something fierce and protective rise up in his chest. Something he thought had died with his wife and child. "The girl stays," Marcus said, his voice quiet, but with the cold, hard weight of iron. "She's done nothing wrong." Garrison's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "You defending her makes you just as guilty, Hartwell. Maybe we should carve Indian Lover into your forehead, too." One of Garrison's men, a young private with nervous eyes and fidgety hands, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Captain, maybe we should just take her back to town, for a proper trial." "Shut your mouth, Morrison!" Garrison snapped without even looking at him. "I don't need advice from some green-faced kid who can't tell right from wrong." Marcus noted the way the young soldier, Morrison, flinched. He saw the doubt in the boy's eyes. That was something he might be able to use. "Tell you what, Hartwell," Garrison continued, pulling a long, thick rope from his saddle with a practiced ease that made Marcus's stomach turn. "You hand over the girl, and we'll make this quick. She won't suffer much." "What do you mean?" Isabella stepped forward, her voice ringing with a courage she couldn't possibly feel. Garrison's smile was a predatory slash, showing too many teeth. "Same thing we do to all Indian sympathizers. We tie you behind a horse and drag you through town. Let folks see what happens to traitors." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. He'd heard rumors about Garrison's brutal methods, but hearing them spoken so casually, so proudly, made his gut twist into a sickening knot. That's murder," the young private Morrison stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "That's justice," Garrison corrected him coldly. "Sometimes justice ain't pretty, boy. Sometimes it's messy and loud and it leaves stains on the ground. But it sends a message that keeps good people safe." Isabella's hand found Marcus's arm. Her fingers were ice cold, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "He killed those Crow families," she whispered, so low only Marcus could hear. "Last spring. Standing Wolf told me before he died. Garrison burned their camp while the men were away on a hunt." Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped drum. If she was right, then Garrison wasn't just a cruel bigot. He was a cold-blooded mass murderer, hiding his crimes behind a soldier's uniform. "You're making a big mistake, Hartwell," Garrison said, slowly, deliberately, unwinding his rope. "Hand her over now, or we'll take her anyway. And maybe we'll just take you too. For being an accomplice." The other soldiers looked uneasy now. Even hard men had lines they wouldn't cross, and dragging a young woman to her death was a line too far for most. But fear of Garrison, fear of his power and his temper, kept them silent. In that moment, Marcus made his choice. He raised his rifle until the barrel was pointing straight at the center of Captain Garrison's chest. "The girl stays," he said, his voice flat and deadly. "Leave now, or face the consequences." Garrison's face turned a mottled, furious red. "Are you threatening an officer of the territorial militia, Hartwell?" "I'm protecting an innocent person from a murderer," Marcus replied, his finger tightening on the trigger. "There's a big difference." The standoff stretched, the silence pulled taut as a wire, ready to snap at any second. The birds stopped singing. The wind died down. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting to see who would break first. The tension crackled like lightning in the air. Marcus kept his rifle trained on Garrison's heart, his mind a blur of calculations. Distances. Cover. Angles of fire. 6 against 2 were terrible odds. But he'd faced worse during the war and walked away. "You've got 10 seconds to reconsider, Hartwell," Garrison snarled, his hand creeping slowly, deliberately, toward the butt of his pistol. "After that, we take what we came for, and you can explain to St. Peter why you died protecting Indian-loving trash." Isabella took a small step to her left, putting a few feet of space between herself and Marcus. Smart girl. She understood. Spreading out made it harder for them to be targeted at the same time. "Captain," the young Private Morrison spoke up again, his voice trembling but determined. Maybe you should grow a backbone, Morrison," Garrison roared. "We've got our orders, straight from Colonel Bradford himself. Bring back the girl, dead or alive." Marcus caught the lie instantly. He knew Colonel Bradford, a decent, by-the-book officer. Bradford would never order the murder of an unarmed civilian. Garrison was acting on his own twisted authority, using his rank to bully his men into following illegal, immoral orders. "What orders?" Isabella called out, her voice surprisingly loud and clear in the tense silence. "Show us the written command from your colonel." Garrison's face went from red to a deep, dangerous purple. "I don't need to show you nothing, you little—" "Because there are no written orders, are there?" Isabella pressed, her voice gaining strength with every word. "You're not here on official business. You're here for revenge, because I know what you did to Standing Wolf's people." The accusation hung in the air like gun smoke. 2 of Garrison's men exchanged nervous, worried glances. They'd all heard the rumors about the Crow Village massacre, but to hear it spoken so plainly, so boldly, made it terrifyingly real. "Careful with your words, girl," Garrison warned, his voice low and menacing. "Lies can get you killed a lot faster than the truth." "Then let me tell you some truth," Isabella said. Her hand moved, not toward a weapon, but into the pocket of her worn dress. She pulled out the small, beaded Comanche pouch, but Marcus could see now that it held more than just a memory. With steady fingers, Isabella opened the pouch and tipped its contents into her palm. A single, tarnished military button. The kind a high-ranking officer wore on his dress uniform. It was stained with something dark, something that looked like old, dried blood. "Standing Wolf gave me this before he died," she said, holding it up so every man there could see. "He pulled it from the uniform of the officer who murdered his wife and children. The officer who burned their camp and then lied about it, calling it a battle." Garrison went perfectly still, a snake coiled and ready to strike. "Where did you really get that?" "From a dying man who wanted justice for his family," Isabella replied, her voice ringing with the unshakable power of truth. "A man who described the officer perfectly. Tall, blonde hair, and a scar on his left cheek from an old knife fight." Every eye in the yard swiveled from the button in Isabella's hand to Captain Garrison's face, to the jagged white line that ran from the corner of his ear down to his jaw. The pieces fell into place with a sickening, audible click. "She's lying!" Garrison shouted, but his voice cracked, the sound of a desperate man losing control. "I've never seen that button before in my life." But Private Morrison leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes squinting as he studied the button. "Captain, that looks like the one you lost during the spring campaign. Remember, You were real upset about it. Said it was from your dress uniform. The words hit Garrison like a punch to the gut. His face went bone white. His hand, the one hovering over his pistol, began to tremble. "Morrison, you idiot!" Garrison screamed, his voice a high-pitched shriek of panic and rage. "You shut your mouth before I shut it for you, Permanent." But the damage was done. The other soldiers were putting it all together now, the things that hadn't made sense before. How Garrison had come back from that battle, with bloodstains on his clothes that weren't his own. How he'd been jumpy and mean-tempered for weeks afterward. How the official report never quite matched what the scouts had seen. "Dear God," whispered another soldier, a grizzled old sergeant with gray whiskers. "Captain, please tell me you didn't kill civilians." Garrison's control finally snapped. The mask of the disciplined officer fell away, revealing the monster beneath. "They were all hostiles," he bellowed, his eyes wild and spitting fury. "Every last one of them. Women teaching their brats to hate white folks. Old men planning raids. I did what needed to be done." The confession landed like a thunderbolt. Even the most hardened soldiers looked sickened at the thought of slaughtering women and children in their sleep. "That's enough," the grizzled sergeant said, his voice firm and heavy with disgust. "Captain Wade Garrison, I am placing you under arrest for the murder of non-combatants and the filing of false military reports." Garrison spun his horse to face the sergeant, his eyes wide with a cornered animal's desperation. "You can't arrest me! I'm your commanding officer." "Not anymore, you're not," the sergeant replied sadly. "Not after what you just admitted." But Garrison wasn't finished. He was a rabid dog, and he was going to take someone down with him. With a speed that defied belief, he drew his pistol, swung it around, and aimed it straight at Isabella's heart. "If I'm going down," he screamed, "she's coming with me." Marcus moved without thinking. He threw himself sideways, his rifle already coming up to his shoulder, just as Garrison's finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot echoed across the valley like a clap of doom. And in that single, deafening moment, everything changed forever. The first shot cracked like thunder, sending birds exploding from the pines in a panicked black cloud. Marcus dove behind a heavy wooden water trough as Captain Garrison's bullet splintered the cabin door, right where his head had been a heartbeat before. "Should have minded your own business, Hartwell," Garrison roared, spurring his horse sideways as Marcus returned fire, the shot kicking up dirt near the stallion's hooves. The captain's men scattered, diving for cover behind fence posts and the old barn, caught between their murderous commander and the lone rancher. Isabella pressed herself flat against the cabin wall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a drumbeat of war. Through the window, she watched Marcus reload, his hands steady and sure amidst the chaos. He moved like a man who knew this terrible dance all too well. But then, she saw something else. The young private, Nathan Morrison. He was still on his horse, frozen, his rifle pointing at the ground. He wasn't shooting. "Porter!" Garrison screamed, his face a mask of pure rage. "Shoot him, you coward!" Nathan's face was white as a ghost. "Captain, this ain't right. She's just a girl." Garrison's fury twisted into something murderous. He swung his rifle around, aiming it not at Marcus, but at his own soldier. "Then you're a traitor, too." The shot that was meant for Nathan Porter went wide. Because Marcus's bullet found its mark. Garrison jerked violently in his saddle, a dark crimson flower blooming across the chest of his blue uniform coat. His horse reared in panic, and the captain tumbled from its back, landing in the hard-packed earth with a sickening final thud. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound, than the gunshots had been. Smoke drifted lazily from rifle barrels. The remaining soldiers just stared, stunned, at their fallen captain. Then, Isabella stepped out from the cover of the cabin. In her small hands, she held Garrison's own pistol, its barrel steady and unwavering. "I took this from his holster while you were all watching Marcus," she said, her voice quiet but carrying across the yard. "Captain Garrison was going to shoot that boy for showing mercy." Nathan slid from his saddle, his legs shaking so badly he could barely stand. "Is he—" Marcus was already kneeling beside Garrison, his fingers pressed to the man's throat. "He's alive. But he needs a doctor, fast." "Nearest one's in Helena," Nathan said, his voice hollow. "That's a day's ride." Isabella walked over to where Garrison lay groaning in the dirt. Blood frothed at the corners of his mouth. His breathing was a short, painful, rattling gasp. She looked down at the man who had ordered her death, and there was no pity in her eyes. Only a cold, hard demand for justice. "Before you die," she said, her voice clear as a church bell on a cold morning, "tell them. Tell them about Standing Wolf's village. Tell them about the children." Garrison's eyes widened with a mixture of fear and pain. I don't know what you mean." "You burned their lodges while the warriors were away hunting buffalo," Isabella continued, her voice relentless. 12 women, 7 children. You shot them down like rabbits, and you wrote in your report that it was a fierce battle against hostile warriors. Nathan's face went gray. "Captain, is that true?" The other soldiers gathered closer, the seeds of doubt now blooming into a horrifying certainty. The grizzled sergeant, Bill Murphy, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "I always wondered about that battle report," Murphy said slowly. "We never found no weapons at that village. Just women's things, children's toys." Garrison tried to speak, but only a bloody foam came from his lips. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he went still. "He's dead," Marcus announced, standing up and brushing the dirt from his knees. Isabella felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow, aching void where justice should have been. "He took his secrets with him." But Nathan shook his head, his young face set with a new and terrible determination. "No, ma'am, he didn't. I can testify to what you said, and I bet the others can too, now that they know it's safe to speak up." Sergeant Murphy nodded grimly. "Damn right. Garrison had a way of making folks keep quiet, but dead men can't make threats." As they wrapped Garrison's body in a horse blanket, Nathan started talking. He told them about other strange orders the captain had given over the past year. Patrols that returned with stories that never quite added up. Supply wagons that went missing on lonely stretches of road. Money that vanished from the regiment's payroll funds. "He was stealing from the army, too," Nathan said, the pieces clicking into place for him as he spoke. "Selling rifles and ammunition to anyone with cash, including some of the same Indian bands we were supposed to be fighting." Isabella looked at Marcus, her eyes wide with the horrifying realization. Garrison hadn't just been covering up a single massacre. He had been starting his own private war, creating chaos and conflict to cover up his crimes, to make himself rich from the bloodshed. The sun climbed higher in the sky as they dug a makeshift grave for the captain, down by the cottonwoods near Willow Creek. The work was slow and hard, but each shovel full of earth felt like a small victory against the deep corruption the man had represented. "What happens now?" Marcus asked as they packed the last of the soil over the grave. Nathan straightened his shoulders. In the space of a single morning, he seemed to have aged 10 years. "Now, we ride to Helena, and we tell the truth. All of it. The army needs to know everything Garrison was doing." Sergeant Murphy and the other soldiers mounted their horses. Their faces were serious, grim, but no longer hostile. Before they rode away, Murphy turned in his saddle and touched the brim of his hat to Isabella. "Ma'am," he said, his voice rough with respect, "I want you to know, we ain't all like him. Some of us still remember what honor means." As the dust from their departure settled over the ranch, Isabella and Marcus stood side by side, watching the riders disappear over the eastern ridge. The immediate crisis had passed. The gun smoke had cleared. But they both knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their bones, that their lives had been changed forever. Winter came early and hard to the Montana Territory that year. It painted the world in endless shades of white and silver, burying the golden hills under a deep, silent blanket of snow. Inside Marcus's small cabin, Isabella stirred a pot of venison stew, the rich aroma a welcome defiance against the cold. Snow piled up against the windows, a curtain drawn by nature, shutting out the harsh world beyond. 3 months had passed since Captain Garrison's death. 3 months of isolation, waiting. The Army's investigation, they'd heard, had uncovered a web of corruption and murder that shocked even the most hardened military men. Nathan Porter, promoted to sergeant for his courage, had become a regular visitor. He'd ride out from Helena whenever the weather broke, bringing news and supplies they couldn't get for themselves. "The territorial governor wants to meet you both," Nathan announced on his latest visit, stamping snow from his boots as he stepped into the warm cabin. "Word of what happened here has spread all over. Folks are calling you heroes." Isabella let out a soft laugh, a sound like clear water running over smooth stones. "Heroes don't hide in the mountains all winter, Nathan." But Marcus understood. The story had taken on a life of its own. The tale of the lonely, haunted rancher who stood up to a corrupt captain to save an innocent girl had traveled from town to town, growing with each telling. More importantly, it had given other people courage. Other victims of Garrison's cruelty, soldiers who had been too afraid to speak up before, were now coming forward. The army was finally being forced to clean its own house. "There's something else," Nathan said, gratefully accepting a steaming cup of coffee. "The territorial legislature. They're talking about making you the new sheriff of Cedar Ridge, Marcus. The town's growing fast with all the new mining claims. They need a man they can trust." Marcus looked out the window at his cattle, sturdy, dark shapes moving slowly through the deep snow toward the hay he'd put out that morning. He had built this ranch as a fortress, a retreat from the world and its judgment. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to rejoin that world. Not as a victim, but on his own terms. He looked over at Isabella. She was sitting by the fire, mending one of his shirts, the firelight catching the warm tones in her dark hair. "What do you think?" he asked her. She set down her needle and thread, her expression thoughtful. "I think," she said slowly, "that some battles are worth fighting, and some bridges are worth building." That evening, long after Nathan had ridden back toward Helena, Marcus and Isabella sat before the fire, the silence between them comfortable and deep. They talked about the future, something neither of them had dared to do for a very long time. The Comanche beadwork was still tied around her wrist. It was no longer a mark of shame. It was a badge of survival, a reminder of unexpected kindness in the heart of darkness. "My father had a saying," Isabella said, her voice soft in the flickering light. "He said that flowers grow best in soil that's been broken and turned over. Maybe that's what happened to us." Marcus reached out and took her hand. He marveled at how something so terrible, so violent and ugly, could have led him to this quiet, peaceful moment. To her. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," she said, her eyes growing distant with memory. "He always said that home isn't a place. It's the people who choose to stay with you, even when staying gets hard." Outside, the wind howled through the pines like a lonely ghost. But inside the cabin, it was warm and safe and full of a fragile, burgeoning hope. They talked until the fire burned down to glowing embers, making plans for the spring, for the new life they wanted to build, together. When the March thaw finally came, melting the snow and painting the valley in brilliant shades of green, Nathan returned. He brought with him official papers from the governor, and a shiny five-pointed star that gleamed like a promise in the morning sun. "Sheriff Marcus Hartwell," Nathan said with a wide grin. "Has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" The town of Cedar Ridge had indeed grown over the winter. New, raw lumber buildings lined what passed for a main street. The air was filled with the sound of hammers and saws as more families arrived, all seeking their fortunes in the rich Montana soil. Marcus found that being a sheriff was less about gunfights and more about listening. About finding common ground between angry miners and worried shopkeepers. About being fair. Isabella proved to be just as vital to the new community as he was. Her knowledge of healing plants, learned during her brief time with the Comanche, saved more than one life when the circuit doctor was delayed by bad weather or high water. Her fluency in Spanish helped soothe disputes with the Mexican miners who had come north seeking gold. But it was her quiet, unshakable strength that people remembered most. The way she could face down a drunken brawler with nothing more than her steady gaze and calm words. The way she stood up for other women who, like her, found themselves judged by society's narrow, unforgiving rules. One warm afternoon in late spring, Marcus found her out behind their cabin, which they had expanded with 2 new rooms and a proper front porch. She was planting wildflowers, the seeds collected from all over the territory. Prairie blooms from the eastern plains, hardy mountain varieties from the high country, and vibrant desert flowers she traded for with travelers coming up from the south. "What are you going to call this garden?" Marcus asked, leaning against a fence post and watching her work, her hands gentle in the rich, dark earth. Isabella looked up at him and smiled. There was a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and pure, undiluted happiness shining in her dark eyes. "I think," she said, "I'll call it the Garden of Second Chances." That summer, as Cedar Ridge's first sheriff, Marcus Hartwell discovered that justice came in many forms. Sometimes it meant stopping a fight with quiet words rather than with fists. Sometimes it required standing firm against a wealthy landowner who thought his money put him above the law. And sometimes it simply meant treating every single person with dignity, regardless of what whispers and rumors might follow them. The star on his chest carried weight, but it was not the crushing weight of the past. It was the good, solid weight of responsibility freely chosen, of trust that had been earned, not inherited. As autumn painted the mountains gold once again, exactly 1 year after he had found a broken girl tied to a cottonwood tree, Marcus stood on his porch, watching the sun set over the bustling valley. His wife, they had married quietly in June, worked beside him, hanging clean laundry on a line, the white sheets snapping like flags in the cool mountain breeze. In the distance, a meadowlark sang its evening song, the notes carrying on the wind like a promise that some stories, no matter how dark their beginning, can find their way to a joyful end. The ranch that had once been his hiding place had become a foundation. And in the garden behind the cabin, wildflowers from a dozen different places bloomed together in a riot of brilliant, defiant color, proving that the most beautiful things can grow from the most broken ground, if only they are tended with care and watered with hope. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption in the Old West, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales from the frontier.